any questions about the standing orders or about the motion? Let me just check that all the speakers are in the right order. On prop, and I apologize because I'm going to manual some of your names. On prop, I have Mukuzesha, okay, Ariel, and then Menzi, be in order, and Mukuzesha, you'll be doing the reply. Op, I have Barbara, Adam, and Nicholas in that order, and who's doing reply? It's Barbara. Okay, great. Well, if there's no further questions, I'd like to invite the first speaker of the proposition to address the House.
Just one moment, please. Dictionary. Stopwatch, please. Oh, thank you.
Okay, right.
Great. Can everyone hear me if I speak like this? Awesome. If there's nothing else, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. At the foundation of sport is a promise. It is a promise of community. A system in which individuals are all represented and every individual's ability and capacity to actualize is represented. We think the foundational promises of this and more are more important than any possible benefit that could possibly come from professionalization. We regret it in all of its forms, but very proud to propose the motion. Very quickly, how do we want to define the motion? We define professionalization of sport as the institutionalization and conversion of the world of sport into a world that is characterized by commercialization and business making. We think there are 3 things to note about this. The first is we think the profit at all costs incentive that informs how we think about sports, how we do sports, and how sports companies and sports clubs operate internally. Secondly, we think it's the question of marketability becoming the top priority in the world of sport and in the way in which sport is done. And thirdly, we think it deals with a pervasive structure of commercialization that has minimal opt-in and opt-out mechanisms when it comes to accessing sport as an institution. In terms of our counterfactual, we support volunteerism as an alternative to the professionalization of sport. This is to say that we define volunteerism as this idea of collective ownership in sports. It's an idea that says that teams can be owned by individuals, can be owned by organizations, can be owned by companies, and so on. But the whole idea is having multiple groups of people coming together and saying this is something that is culturally valuable to us. This is something that is significant to our community. We are collectively going to be involved in the ownership and management of this thing in a manner that is decentralized. 2 things quickly on what this looks like. First, we think there are far less barriers of access to entry, not only to the organization and management of the sport and the sports clubs, but more importantly, just generally far less barriers of access when it comes to the consumption of the sport in and of itself. But secondly, we think on our side, profit making in the world of sport and in general things like payment of players is not really precluded. We think it's perfectly possible to have volunteer-based organizations that still pay their individuals. The distinction here is that we think on their side, what they have to defend is a character of sports that deals with profit at all costs. On our side, we say there are some costs that profits are not worth, and those costs are the human costs that are more often than not associated with the commercialization on sport. We regret something then when firstly the harms associated with that thing are self-propagating, but secondly when the harms of that thing are all-consuming with regards to the ideals that we think sport should stand for in the world on our side. 2 arguments then in this speech. Firstly, on the principle and on the universalization of sport. Secondly, on why we think we're overall better for players. Ariel is going to talk about why she thinks and why we think as a bench that the volunteerism in sport is overall better for sport as an institution when it comes to accessing the sport and accessing the institution of sport. Very quickly before my first argument accepted.
Those 2 worlds are not exclusive. commercial clubs like FC Barcelona are owned by their community as a shareholder, but still produce everything for the profit. Those two things are not mutually exclusive.
We think it's worth noting the distinction here is we don't object to the generation of profit as an outcome in the world of sport and in the world of generation. The analysis that I give you is that the nuance on our side is with regards to the kinds of costs that we think are not worth making profits on our side of the debate. This is to say that we support companies and we support volunteer-based sports organizations making profits. We support these organizations paying their players and so on. We just think that the character of professionalization in the vast majority of instances, whether it's in the world of tennis or in the world of sumo wrestling, is a character that is so all-consuming that it takes away the opportunity to think about any outcomes other than profit-making in and of itself. First argument then on the principle, which is on the universalization of sport. The premise of this argument is that we think sport has a universal quality that in and of itself, for no reason other than its own character, is worth defending. We think there are three things that this universalization looks like. First, we think it looks like sports existing as an output of cultures in the various communities from which it emerges. So this is to say that the whole idea that Liverpool prioritizes the history of football as a sport over everything else, and how every output when it comes to the players of Liverpool, but also when it comes to the marketing of the sport club, is an output that celebrates this cultural origin of the sport. Secondly, we think it looks like the idea that sport exists as a common language that unifies individuals from across the globe. We don't think you can prioritize this character when you prioritize the professionalization and commercialization of sport. Lastly, we think it looks like the geopolitical implications of playing sport. We think the best example of this is in World War I, where on the evening of Christmas, we think France and Germany went out of the trenches in the middle of a war to play a football game. We think it looks like the celebration of these things for their own intrinsic value and for the intrinsic value that we think sport brings to society. The claim of this principle then is that we think the professionalization of sport flies in the face of the universalist ideals that we think should inform sport. How? First, we think because they create barriers of access that impede the capacity of ordinary individuals to access the sport. This is to say, when you think about things like Wimbledon or the World Cup and so on, we think at the most basic level, they impede the capacity of individuals within the community in which these sports exist to access the sport. But we think overall, we think they create financial barriers of access that we think are always worth opposing on our side of the debate. Secondly, we think the existence of the professionalization of sport specifically is responsible for the creation of countercultures such as cheating and doping and so on. We think these things are unique to the commercialization of sport because in their world, these things are directly tied to the capacity of sports clubs to make money, to make profits, and so on. And those things become an incentive for coaches to encourage their players to engage in such illicit practices. The last thing is that we think it changes how we even think about sport as an institution. This is to say that we think it deprioritizes the idea of celebrating sport for the humanity that it introduces to the world in which we know it and to the world as we know it, and rather tells us that you should only care about sport because it is good for money, it is good for this one person making a lot of money. We oppose that. The importance of this principle is that we think it is not contingent on practical outcomes. This is to say that whether or not sport is commercialized, we think the whole idea is that sport and the integrity of sport is worth defending on either side of the debate. This means then they have to defend an integrity of sport that is characterized by things like doping and cheating, that is characterized by things like barriers of access, all of which are things that we think characterize the status quo. The conclusion of this argument then is that we think sport in and of itself, for its universal quality, is something that is worth defending. We think we defend that on our side through our philosophy on volunteerism. We're proud to regret this motion. Second argument then on why we think we're uniquely better for players. The premise of this argument is that we think the pervasive influence of the professionalization and commercialization of sport is harmful in that it strips players of opt-in and opt-out mechanisms from this sport. What does this look like? Three things. One, it means that these players are far more likely to opt into cheating because they have to do so to survive within a professionalized world of sport. The best example of this is sumo wrestling in Japan, where no one below the top 80 sumo wrestlers in the country gets paid any money whatsoever for any of the work that they do. Because of this, there's an active incentive to practice things like match fixing, like match rigging, and so on. We think this is harmful and is exclusive to a professionalized world of sport. Secondly, we think it looks like players being forced to overwork to remain relevant, often at the expense of their health, but more importantly at the expense of their dignity, in which they're treated as a means to a capitalist end that in the vast majority of instances doesn't actually benefit them. But in the third case, we think it looks like creating unreasonable reasonable expectations in order for these players to get meaningful pay. As I said, the idea that if you're ranked 81st as a sumo wrestler in Japan, you cannot access payment, you cannot access remuneration for the hard work that we think it takes to play any kind of sport. The claim then is that we think volunteerism as a philosophy empowers players to reclaim their autonomy in the face of the reclamation of this autonomy by the world of professionalization and commercialization. The reason why we think this is true is because we think the vicinity that players have to their fan base, to the owners of these organizations, and so on, in a world of volunteerism, is a vicinity that impedes owners of these clubs to force these players to do things that, in the majority of cases, are harmful to their welfare. The impact of this is that we think on our side, player welfare is achieved, and we think player welfare in and of itself is valuable to the philosophy of sport that we think in all instances is worth defending. We're very proud to propose the integrity of sport. Thank you.
Alright, I thank the first speaker of the proposition. To open the opposition case, I'd like to invite the first speaker to take the floor. Please come in.
May I? If I told you that you should train 6 hours a day and dedicate every day of your life to training for a sport that you know that you never get paid for, you know that you're never going to compete on the greatest, in the greatest league, would you take that offer? We believe that's not likely. And that is exactly what's going to happen on the side of proposition. So first of all, let's look at some more realistic framing of this round and what are the stances of both of the teams. So first of all, on our side of the house, we don't force all athletes to be professional. We defend the status quo as it is currently. Thus, the debate supports the trend we currently see in the reality. This looks like having 1 or 2 professional divisions, such as the Premier League, and then having a bunch of village clubs and leagues in which people can still play the sport on whatever level and voluntary basis they wish to enjoy. But what does it look on the side of proposition is the fact that on their side of the house, the players are not probably paid because they are there on the voluntarily basis. Everything is happening on the voluntary basis, which means that they don't get as good facilities. They don't get as much assistance as we do on our house side of the house, because we get the money to finance all of this because sports become more popular, thus more money flows into it from the sponsorship. Thus, we have more money for that better facilities, media space, and overall to transform these athletes to be professional and then have the capacity to have those professional leagues, not happening on their side of the house. And when they tell you that you're going to have community-owned teams, we tell you that this is currently happening even with the commercialization on our side of the house, such as with Barcelona or other teams in Africa. So that is not something exclusive for their side of the house. So let's look at the two of their arguments. So first of all, when they talk about their principal argument, that's going to clash with our first argument, but I would like to pinpoint one of the points about the creation of culture of cheating, which we believe that there are massive persecutions for that, so no team can afford to have their whole team cheating. We believe that there's such a large pool of players that you can choose who you want to have in that team, and no teams want to be the one with the label like we cheat, we promote the doping on our team, which we believe that there's such scrutiny that no big team can afford. And when we're talking about individual doping, we believe that that is quite symmetrical on both sides of the house, because there are more individual incentives that go to that. To their second argument, we tell you that in the long run, nobody wants to damage their health. Nobody wants to damage their reputation, because if you have one of these scandals, it basically means that you need to end your career as a professional athlete, because it always stays with you that mark on your reputation. Thus, you don't want to damage your own well-being for your own, for your own sake, but you don't want to damage it also for the team. Also, if we look on the comparative, we believe that on our side of the house, the team cares more about the well-being of their athletes because they get the profit for them, that they don't want their athletes to damage their health. On their side of the house, we even say that there could be greater probability of like doping and cheating because it's voluntary basis. There are no profit incentives of keeping that players. We also tell you that players are not the most important stakeholder in this debate because there's few of them. We believe that what we will bring you in our own constructive argumentation, which are the fans and the disprivileged communities, are much more important because there's much more of them. With that said, let's look at our first argument about engagement of poor communities. What we tell you is that on proposition, people choose clubs based on the proximity to their home and based on entry barriers which they have to base when they enter those clubs. Those are two main things. First of all, how much they have to pay to enter that club, and second of all, how much they need to pay for the equipment they need. Because if you're like playing sports, you probably need to buy some like skates, boots, balls, etc. That kind of equipment. This means that in poor neighborhoods, you are not probably very proximate to great clubs and you don't have that much money to buy that equipment, which is not going to be accessible in that poor neighborhood. Which means, no thank you, that you can either go to a club which has like bad equipment, bad training conditions, etc. Or you can, at a high entry barrier cost, go into a good club, but that will probably ruin your family or it will come at a huge expense. That is more complicated on their side of the house. What changes, no thank you, on our side of the house is that clubs know they need to have the best players in order to be able to compete with other teams. Thus, the best players are probably dispersed through all of the socio-economical spheres. That means that the majority of them are not rich. Thus, there's the incentive to push those entry barriers low. What it means that the teams know that they can get a lot of money if they scout for good players. How this looks like is that, for example, Barcelona getting Messi, who like lived in very poor conditions, and now he's like a great football player. They know that these people will generate a lot of money for them because they can then sell a lot of tickets to the plays that are going to the matches that are going to happen. They can sell t-shirts with that players' names. They can get sponsorships, no thank you, because of that players. Thus they have this monetary and business incentive to get as many best players as they can. So clubs on our side of the house have the incentive to invest in poor communities and open free academies for young players. We see this with Barcelona, who has the free academy, which is best in the world, and literally anybody can apply to that. It is the same with Slavia in Prague, having an academy for African players with full scholarship covered for them, because they know that when they take this opportunity and train those people, they're going to get the greatest benefit for that. So what are the impacts of that? First of all, you support the kids who would, on their side of the house, don't have access to that, which means that they can get more fulfillment, more passion from that sport, because their biggest dream now isn't that they're going to just play behind their house, but they know that they can achieve something as big as playing at a big field. It also has a great implication on their health, because as the clubs have more finances, they can help them to get a facility with professionals which can provide them better training, better dietary requirements, better focus on their health. Second of all, we tell you that it's better because people can achieve their dreams much better, and then they can give back to the community. We tell you that it's not probable that most of the people will succeed, but even if only few of these football players succeed, it means that they will get billions of revenue when they play for that big teams, which means that they can then give back to the community, they can invest back. This happened with Mohamed Salah investing back to Egypt after he had his great football career. It is the same with Messi, who invests into the Rosario community in Argentina. Second of all, it also looks like those people getting college scholarships, which they could never achieve without these academies, because they would not have the access to such education and would not get those funds, which means that there's greater social mobility. And third of all, it creates role models which inspire the people in those communities. And lastly, the third impact is that it brings attention to the issues that happen in those local communities, because it gives the players who now became famous the platform to talk about them. And for all these reasons, I'm so proud to oppose.
Alright, I thank the first opposition speaker. To continue the debate, I invite the second proposition speaker to have the floor.
want a stopwatch? Thank you. Just press it here.
In this off. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, am I audible like this?
Yes.
All right, great. I will begin in 3, 2, 1. Engraved in our memory, as an international community, is the product of the universal language known as sport. It unites us. It solidifies us. It connects us. Sorry, my mistake. It connects those of us who can afford to make that connection at any cost. A faulty connection whose signal we on side proposition are adamant on fixing. Right? Taking a look at opposition's case thus far, firstly, they said that sport right now completely hinges on sports being completely void of monetary involvement on our side, right? And they asked us the question, would you participate in a sport that you aren't paid for? But this assumption was a strategic flaw on their end because it makes the assumption that just because an organization is voluntary and non-profit, it means that the organization is broke and makes no money. This is flawed on their side of the house because at the end of the day, we're not saying that we don't want sports to not be monetary. We're not saying that we don't want sports to involve no money. We're simply saying that the amount of money that that sport is making must not be commercialized. It must not be for the sake of making profit, but rather for the sake of continuing that sport in a manner that benefits all involved parties. Right? So at the end of the day, voluntarism doesn't mean that you become a charity case, right? But even if it was, right, people historically play sport without financial incentive, right? For example, children in the streets play sports every day without you having to pay them because it's something that is enjoyable, right? People in workplaces and schools play sports because it is something that is enjoyable. If we split everyone in this room right now into teams and provided a ball, chances are most people in this room would play that sport simply for the fact that that sport is something that is enjoyable and people want to play it. They don't always want to play it just because they want to get paid. We think that is a lie on their side of the house, right? Secondly, they also don't realize that paying to access a sport is commercialization. Right? So yes, things cost money, but the second it requires money to sustain a certain thing, the second that money stops you from being able to really advance in that sport means that commercialization is occurring, and that's what we are saying no to. We're essentially saying as long as commercialization is happening, it is wrong. And the thing that is making that commercialization wrong is the fact that the money is required and is a prerequisite rather than something that is usually just for the sake of continuing that sport. Right? Now, we wanted opposition to prove that commercialization compared to voluntarism is best overall for everyone, not just the clubs and the people who run them. But they failed to do this and instead showed that they show no remorse for the players who are being abused and oppressed within these systems because they have to play for money. They show no remorse for the people who dream but cannot fulfill those dreams because they cannot be in that space, right? They spoke about fulfillment of dreams, but to what extent are these dreams really being fulfilled, right? Because big fields don't disappear on our side of the house. It's not like they go away and you cannot have that dream, right? But what are the chances of these dreams becoming a reality in the cruel world of profit for the young child who ends up saying, you know what, I want to fulfill this dream, I want to go there, but I cannot do so because I cannot afford it, because I cannot afford to be recognized, I cannot afford to be seen. It is something that we think is wrong on our side of the house, right? Now let's make a few things clear on our side of the house. Principally, the pervasive nature of capitalism and consumerism is something we ought to protect sports from in said principle, right? It basically boils down to profit at all costs being against the core values of sport in and out of itself, right? The soul of sport is what people are selling. That is the cost, right? Cultures are tied to sports. Identities of players are tied to sports. The second we start to say that profit is what we want to maximize above all of these things means that the minorities who are involved in sports are being put under profit. The people who are culturally tied to these sports are being put under profit. You are prioritizing something that has to do with money over the prioritization of human beings, and we don't think that this is correct because at the end of the day, human beings play sports for themselves and not for the sake of money, and we think turning this around and flipping it and saying that money is what matters overall is what we are saying no to, right? Our first reminded you of the historic moment amidst a war of blood, revenge, and hatred.
What?
That sports unified two nations that previously to that moment were in trenches wanting to off and kill each other. We're saying essentially that that is the power that sports has in and out of itself. Sports has a power to unite people. Sports has a power to connect people. But the second you put barriers to that connection means that you're putting barriers to that power of unity. You're putting barriers to the ability of sports to unite those people, and we say that this is wrong, right? They also spoke of opt-in and opt-out mechanisms, right? Opting into, for example, mispractices within sporting. Right? The reason we're saying this is wrong is because mispractice in and out of itself is wrong. Why? Because, number one, cheating is just bad for the people who are involved in a certain sport. Because one person could work really hard and another person could cheat and win that sport. For example, we would not want somebody in this debate room to be using a cell phone or something because that would be cheating and it would disadvantage the other team. So why then would we say that this is correct in a sport? The reason why we're saying this is important is because once that mispractice is held in that sport, right, it's difficult to then maintain and regulate it. And the reason why this mispractice is happening in those sports is because people want to make money. People want to win, not for the sake of the sport and for the spirit of the sport, but because they need to make a living out of it, because we've pit them against each other to make money instead of simply pitting them against each other for the sake of the game, which I think is wrong, right? Not being able to opt out of harms as well, right? For example, health harms and also resentment to contracts. Messi being unhappy with the contracts he was put in, but unable to leave those clubs simply because it was a business arrangement and not because he was in that sport because he wanted to play it in that club, right? Now, before my substance.
Do you think that Messi would be taken out of the very poor community given eye surgery and health treatment if it wasn't for the profit incentive of the club that knows that helping the young boy will mean profit for them in the future?
Now, the problem with that argumentation is simply saying the reason why these commercialized clubs are helping these people in the trenches is not because they care about them, but because they want to use them and make a profit out of them, right? The reason we think that this is wrong is as much as Messi was taken out of the trenches, right? We're not saying that this wouldn't have happened on our side of the house because as we've said before, volunteerism doesn't mean that these people are broke. They still would have been able to help Messi, but it would have simply been because Messi is talented and we want someone to play the sport because they are talented. But on their side of the house, they're essentially saying we're okay with Messi in the present day, as I've just said, being used and abused and being told he cannot back out of his contract simply because he is a profitable piece of merchandise instead of an actual human being that we want to humanize, and we don't think that this is correct in any sort of way. Now, a misconception regarding volunteerism is that volunteer-based organizations have no money, as I've said before, but the hard truth is that non-profit organizations utilize money and make money at some cost, right? So it's a byproduct, right? But commercialization is tied solely to profit and making money at any cost, so it is the only product. For example, Vin University actually is a non-profit, but it's not broke. Why is this important? Commercialization leads to making billions of dollars, but the assumption would be that it creates more accessibility because money is used for the people, right? But sports actually becomes more expensive because the more money they make, the more you have to pay to go and watch the FIFA World Cup instead. So it's less accessible for the normal person, despite the fact that they're making billions of dollars, and you would expect the opposite. The sport does not belong to the people, but rather to the industry giants. And this is what we are saying is wrong, because the sports originally belong to the people. Give it back to the people who owned it in the first place. Give it back the priority and the importance that it once had. Bring back that connection. Proud.
All right, I thank the second proposition speaker. I invite the second opposition speaker to address the House.
Can I just take the call with the motion?
What's that? Oh yeah, sure. If it's just the
it's fine.
emotional, yeah, that's fine.
Yes, thank you.
Order my notes.
We attract players, engage more, the audience more, and give more back to local communities only because of this professionalization of only because of the money that come in. In my speech, I will first my speech, I will firstly talk about the clash about cheating. Secondly, I will talk about where the sport is actually more accessible. Then, what is the impact on the sports people on themselves and why they are much more better off as professionals. Then I will also introduce my split argument, which is about basically how the communities themselves are engaged more when we have like professional sports. So let's delve straight into the first clash, which is about match fixing. Let's be clear here. We believe that they do not actually explain to us why actually without the professional sport this match fixing would not happen on their side of the house. We believe that probably people will still have a lots of incentive to actually cheat on their side of the house because people will be probably still motivated by their pride and ego to win and therefore like engage in some cheating. But now why actually the cheating is quite likely to decrease on our side of the house? Simply there are firstly because we have now these professional associations oftentimes financed by this like business by this like huge businesses, and that we have therefore many professionals who can actually monitor the cheating. This looks like Olympic Committee having actually many like doctors and professionals who can actually check daily the people at the Olympics if they have take some doping or not. They probably do not have so much money on their side of the house where basically the sport is not professionalized. They rely primarily on volunteers. Also there, for example, are backed by so much corporate interest. Secondly, let's look on the profit incentives itself. If I have like more profit, no thank you. If I have more profit incentives, this probably means that I necessarily, for example, the club wants to win in order to gain some profit. Therefore, it simply cannot tolerate at all other clubs like cheating because this would mean that their profit will be diminished, which means that clubs are now even harder to actually pressure on like Olympic committees to take like harsh actions and stances against cheating, as we can see in right now, where for example Russian athletes were I think after the Rio Olympics disqualified for many years from Olympics because basically they have like taken a lot of like doping. Also, we believe that when simply you are seen as you are a professional sport player, which means that basically the sport is like basically your only career. You probably do not want this career to get destroyed by actually cheating because this means that you are, for example, banned for the rest of your life from that sport. So we believe that we have clearly like destroyed this small clash about doping. Now let's move to actually the biggest clash of this debate, which is about this where the sport is more accessible. Okay, I think they can.
Very quickly, we think the professionalization of sports is characterized by a profit at all cost narrative that tells players that the risk of getting caught doing drugs is not enough of a risk to impede you from cheating, and therefore you should cheat either way.
Okay, if I'm motivated by the profit, I necessarily probably have to have the profit and income from sport for most of my life. Therefore, I cannot risk being like disqualified for cheating for the rest of my life. Now let's look actually where the sport is more accessible. What they basically like try to only repeat here that the sport is somehow less accessible. When somehow like there is higher entry barrier to the sports because of the finances. We believe that they simply do not prove how suddenly there is higher entry barrier because of the sport is professionalized. Because we have explained that hey, people still can like play sport like regularly. We believe that the professionalization helps on like different levels like differently. That only, for example, you have like the top leagues when usually all the like players are like professional, but you will still also have like small leagues where, for example, I don't know, only the coaches are professional, but still many people who are, for example, like that good at like football could still engage in them. Like for example, in Czech Republic we have like 12 football leagues. In the lower league, simply like only like, for example, the coaches are professional. So we believe that this trend actually is not happening elsewhere at the same pace. Second claim which what we were saying here is that simply now when it comes to these top leagues where actually people can engage better in the, for example, Olympics and these like bigger committees, this is much more better on our side of the house. Why? Because simply at Olympic games or at some top football matches, simply there will be always like limited amounts of like places, the limited amounts of people who can like compete there. Simply like 10,000 people cannot compete like at Olympics games. This means that somehow this would be like more. This means that somehow like the number of people who can compete there will be capped. Now we believe that when simply like actually the football clubs do not have so much money and they are like much more on like volunteering. This means that this like experience is this much more less like inaccessible to people who, for example, do not have resources to themselves to actually pay for training for coaches to actually get to there where the clubs are less rich. Now this looks on our side of the house. We believe that on our side we have proven to you that, hey, simply clubs have more money because, there is this business incentives. This looks like, for example, the clubs want, this is like business incentives, which means that the clubs, for example, function as a companies, which means that they do lots of merch. They, for example, engage, try to, for example, persuade corporate sponsors to actually, sponsor them. Try to, for example, persuade some rich people to actually buy them, which means that which means that they have much more money than on their side. Why is this important? Is because then, as we have explained, we can actually engage in all these scouting. For example, actually setting up football economies in Argentina and discovering players where, for example, Diego Maradona or Messi, who are from poor communities or Argentina. This is something which requires lots of money to set up all these academies around the world. You probably cannot do this when you rely only on volunteerism without functioning as a business and therefore making this profit from merch, from sponsorship and all these kinds of stuff. Our impact is clear here that actually we have done more people, especially from the poor countries, who can actually then enjoy competing at these competing in these matches, and then also, for example, motivate these matches. This impact is also important because this means that the sport is accessible to the people in these poor communities, in a sense that these people, for example, Messi or Messi, who is from a poor community, can actually also serve as a role models to these kids from the poor communities, who can be now actually more motivated to also try football themselves and play it, which means that even on these communities at grassroots level, we have probably better impact when we can have more role models because they are better engaged. Now quickly let's go to the clash about where the sport is more about what is the impact on the professional sports people. The side of proposition is claim here that somehow the sport people are dehumanized because they are just part of some contract. We believe that they do not fail to prove you here any harm on the people themselves, themselves. We believe that when you are a professional sport person, it's great because suddenly you can do your passion full time. You, for example, don't have to have any part-time job to actually support yourself. It also means that, for example, when you are a professional athlete, the football clubs then could, for example, pay you for really good coaches, for really good, for example, health advisors, really good, for example, psychologists who can take care about your health and about your psychology, which probably the clubs would not be able to pay for all these expensive things on their side of the house when they basically do not have this business incentives. So you are actually much more better treated as a sport person on our side of the house. Now also quickly to the fans, we believe that simply when actually the clubs are when we believe that the clubs basically act as a businesses, this means that necessarily they have, for example, actually there more money to, for example, build better build better stadiums, to, for example, engage more with some rallies and activities for their fans, which we believe great because this means that, for example, more people can actually physically go and watch the sports play, or in general more people could become interested in this, which leads in better community. For all these reasons, please vote for the side of opposition. Thank you.
I thank the second speaker of the opposition. I invite the third proposition speaker to take the floor.
Am I audible if I speak like this? Right, awesome. So hi everybody, this is Mason, he's our team mascot, and sadly me and Mason yesterday missed the soccer game that happened, but yeah, cool. So I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, at the heart of capitalism is the innate nature which is very pernicious, which seeks to take human beings and turns them into a means to an end. It is a pernicious nature that has for far too long taken individuals and not treated them as important members of society, but merely as a means and as a commodity upon which they could make sure that they build up the shareholders. That is the case that opposition wants to run for you, and it is a case that we regret. There's 3 things that I'm going to talk about in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the strategic flaws of opposition and why they can't win the debate based off of those. Secondly, I'm going to engage the key clashes in this debate. And then finally, I'm just going to weigh it all up. Let's start with strategic flaws. I think firstly, it's important to note that opposition doesn't necessarily run the debate the way it's supposed to be. That is to say, in first speech, Muko explains to you why volunteer organizations don't necessarily mean that individuals get nothing out of the organization in itself. The only response that you get to this is first speech telling you no, when you volunteer you don't get paid. That's the extent of the response to this case. The rest of that speech in second does not engage at all what our world looks like. Ariel gives you responses to why even in their world we're still likely to win this debate. Let me first weigh it out and show you what volunteer organizations look like, and then afterwards I'll show you why even in our worst case scenario where they look like places where players don't get paid at all, we still win this debate. What do volunteer organizations look like? We say these look like a bunch of things. Firstly, these look like things like Doctors Without Borders. These actively look like a bunch of other volunteer organizations where people actively go out into the world and do these things. The important thing to note about volunteer organizations such as Doctors Without Borders is we think these individuals get compensation. The idea behind these volunteer organizations is that profit is not your driving incentive in what you do, right? Your driving incentive is the nature of whatever that particular thing is supposed to achieve. The fact that they reject that characterization and don't even give you a reason why that characterization is untrue is enough reason for them to lose this debate. But let's be charitable. Let me take them in their best case scenario and say sporting individuals on our side don't get paid at all, right? There's a few things that they tell you about this. They tell you that in their world, firstly, it's very good for people to get paid because people need money and then they pay back to their communities, etc., etc. The first strategic flaw that opposition makes in that case is they tell you that the problem on our side is that people have to pay to get into sport. Note, majority of their case is based on an idea of access and saying that we deny individuals access. The only place where individuals pay to get an access to sport in the first place is a world where sport is commercialized. So if the premise of their case and the entirety of that argumentation line is that access is important, we think they directly harm access on their side. The second thing then that I think is very important to understand here is they give you an idea about how it's very important for sports players because their health is important. On their side, they have so many checking mechanisms to make sure that individuals are more likely to gain access to sport. They tell you that on our side, people are likely to cheat, they're likely to dope, etc., etc. Note, the claim is the extent of that argument, because the only thing that they tell you is sports players have a huge ego, so they have incentive to cheat on our side. First of all, we think, panel, I want you to note the distinct incentives and the difference. First of all, status quo is actively characterized by people like Maradona, who would actively go to training within those sporting industries, drunk and so many other things, but they were never sent away because they were prioritized within that industry because they were good for the commercialization of the sport. But secondly, it's directly characterized by so many people within the wrestling industry who have been banned from these industries because they continue to take up drugs because the incentive to make as much money as possible out of the wins that you get from being a super athlete directly supersede the idea of these individuals caring about their own health. Panel sporting players have historically died from doping because the incentive to become the best in the business is enough for these individuals to want to do this. Let me show you why that exists on their side. Note, Muko explains to you why there's only 80 sumo wrestlers in Japan, literally the capital for sumo wrestling. Only 80 individuals get paid for being the top sumo wrestlers there. This is true for almost all aspects of sports. It means that the only individuals who ever get paid even a substantial amount are people who are at the top of that hierarchy. That is to say, if they tell you that the incentive on their side not to cheat is sustenance, we think the incentive to cheat in the first place is sustenance. Because you need to be good enough. You need to heighten your abilities as much as possible. In most instances, individuals believe drugs do this. That is why they are more likely to dope on their side. Panel, we think the incentive to put your own health on the line in a world where they tell you you get no money just doesn't exist. We don't think individuals would put their health on the line for no reason at all just because of ego. We just don't think that that was true. The next thing that they tell you here, they tell you that on their side, they're better for questions such as scouting and the incentive to go around and look for talent. I think, again, it's important to note what the comparative here is. Because on their side, the best case scenario are these large organizations and these large companies whose only incentive is interest. If your only incentive is profit, it means a few things. It means in most instances, the barriers to entry are higher on their side, right? But then we think secondly, because our side, we explain to you why it's more community-based and it's a question of merely everyone having access to these institutions. We're likely to have an inclusive system that allows all individuals access, but also individuals to play the sport. They tell you that on their side, individuals are still likely to play the sport if they want to, and it's not for commercial purposes, so they can co-opt all of our benefits. There's a few reasons why this is untrue. We think firstly, commercializing or professionalizing sport in itself decreases any other incentive to play it just for the sake of it. We think on their side, people are more likely to judge you if you are really good at playing sport, but you choose not to go professional. It's why the incentive and the pressuring of so many individuals to go professional in status quo exists. So the likelihood of them co-opting any of our benefits is hugely unlikely on their side. Before I continue, yes?
Okay, probably you are more incentivized to play just for fun because you have all these like role model and enjoy this prominence of sport in our society through these ads and that, and you basically want to be your role models, therefore try it for example just for fun.
Okay, so they tell you that you're likely to play for fun because you have role models that exist. But I want you to note the other thing that comes with their side and the existence of those role models is also a fetishization of the lifestyle that they get from the commercialization of sport. We think you still encourage people to want to go professional and to harm themselves on their side. Let's talk about the principal chat here that we have and why they don't adequately respond to it. There's a few things that we tell you in principle, two things in particular. The first is that we think that the nature of sport in itself is something that is important to the human identity, to human socialization, and all these important things. We tell you that it served an important purpose, mainly in the globalization of the idea of humanity, but also in the ending of conflict vis-a-vis World War I, etc., etc. We say when you add capitalistic incentives to the sport in itself, it loses all of that identity and all those things that shape up what sport looks like and what makes it its intrinsic value. That means that the priority of sport becomes a question in which you make sure that capitalistic incentive is sorted, and a question in which you make sure that shareholders have the maximum amount of utility and not the individuals on the ground. We think on a principled level that defeats the purpose of sport. So if you don't buy the first 6 minutes of my speech and everything that I tell you about the pragmatic outcomes, we think just by virtue of wanting to protect the principle of what the purpose of sport is, we win this debate. But the second thing that we tell you that humans are not a means to an end. Note the only incentive that they give you on their side for capitalists to take care of individuals is because they want to use these individuals. We say if that's the nature of the sport that they are willing to defend, and the alternative on our side is the non-existence of a sport or a smaller sport that at least doesn't choose individuals as a means to an end, we're very happy to defend that. The last thing, panel, that I want you to think about. I want you to think about the nature of the individuals who in history have had access to sport. These are individuals whose lives have been taken and tokenized. Individuals that capitalism has taken a whole advantage of and has continued to use them for its own incentives and for its own benefits. We don't think any human being deserves that kind of stripping of their dignity. We don't think anyone should live on opposition bench proud.
Right, I thank the third speaker of the participants. To close the substantive portion of the debate, I'd like to invite the third opposition speaker to take the floor.
Well, proposition comes into this round and they tell you, look, Maradona was doing all those bad stuff, but still he was allowed in gatherings. He still was prioritized when they were inviting guests, etc. Well, then we say that was not only because of money, that was because he was a phenomenon in Argentina, right? So then you can either live in a world where you have no role models, where you have nobody you look up to, nobody who's motivating you to play sports that you respect, or you have the same symmetric scenario where even if it wasn't for money, just for the sheer fact that it's one of the most famous persons in the country, he would still probably be invited to gatherings and plays, right? So we say there's literally no delta, by the way, in a majority of propositions case. Why is that the case? Because they come here with literally no impacts. How? Because they tell you about the principle of access to sports, which we, by the way, directly rebut with a practical impact on the access to sports that we get through like profit incentives. But then secondly, they just tell you how, it is bad to use people for money and everything, even though we give you literal impacts on how you get more benefits to people, how you give back to poor communities, and how you get better engagement with people on the ground. We say we have the impacts in this round. So secondly, what is important in regards to framing? Because they try to outframe the motion and try to go literally against the motion. Look, volunteering, how it has looked like in history, and that is what we base it off, is that you usually pay for very little money. That is what is the reality in lower divisions across the whole world, that you pay for symbolic amount, that you get that you can go for beer for after the match, right? You probably the only one who is paid some money is the referee or maybe the coach. You definitely have no physiotherapists there who will help you with your recovery. You definitely have no psychologists there who are professional in running the club, etc. Don't try to say that a volunteer-based system is like a system in which you still have like the biggest professionals then coming in and actively helping you. That would literally like be against the meaning of the word volunteering, right? So that's firstly. But secondly, we say that it means that overall you have less professionals and less people involved because they cannot, sustain their livelihoods off of that. What we then say is that we, on our side of the house, went through a very simple metric. We say profit incentives, which is where we actually agree to clash, are something that are motivating those clubs to do good. So we say that is a very simple line through which we're going to take this round. How is that the case? Firstly, let's just look at their case and let's just poke some holes into it, right? So firstly, they come in here and they say, oh, doping. They say doping is bad because people cheat, and that's bad because people cheat. That's literally the extent of their analysis. We have never heard why cheating is bad. We have never heard why doping is bad. We have never heard why that's bad in practical. It will be kind of too late in the next speech. But we say that is like the first thing, they have no impact. But secondly, we already rebutted it and they failed to engage. We have told you that it's unlikely that cheating and doping would be encouraged because there are massive fines for it. Notice, no thank you, that when Manchester City was fined, they were literally disallowed for like 3 or 5 years from the Champions League, which make them like hundreds of millions, right? We say that the fines are massive. So it's super unlikely that even when you have a profit-driven system, you would encourage your players to dope and to use illegal substances, because we say that overall you have much higher disbenefits of that. And we have proven to you that on the individual level, people will still probably cheat symmetrically because they want to be the best, they want to, be famous, they want to be everything, and they just say no. If they don't do it for the money, then they won't do these types of things. But then they come and they say, oh, but we will still pay the people. So here comes their contradiction, where they say on the one hand that they will still pay the people, it won't be just volunteer for free, but people won't cheat because they won't do it for the money. They have to choose. It will be too late in their reply. No, thank you. Secondly, there is the thing they say about player opt-out, which I frankly don't understand, because they say you cannot change clubs if you're bounded by a contract, etc. Messi cannot change club. I mean, Messi changed club. He went from Barcelona to PSG, and now he went to Saudi Arabia. I mean, he apparently can change club, right? That's firstly. But secondly, what we say is that the players are much better taken care of when there are the incentives to make money off of them. That means that you much rather pay for a psychotherapist when you know that means that the player is going to be in a better shape for your match and that you can sell more tickets to that match because he's in the best shape, and you know that you can sell more t-shirts with his name because he's in the best shape. I mean, there's much of an incentive to take care of that player when that player literally makes your living. When it means that it will flow a lot of money in, you have the best possible incentive to take the best care of those players. No, thank you. But lastly, they say that there is access to the sport, thus also access to their principle. Notice that this is hinged, because if you have no access to sports, you have no access to that principle of enjoyment of sports. Why we have better access to sports on our side of the house? This is a pretty simple metric. Even though in their last speech they try to say that only if it's commercialized you need to pay for the access. Factually not true. You have to pay for equipment, you have to pay for coaches, you have to pay for the field, you have to pay for a lot of things even when it's not commercialized. We say we give you the money on our side of the house because we have the money in the system, because sponsors are interested in us, because media houses buy media licenses and televising licenses from us. Why do we get the money uniquely on our side of the house are these two reasons. What then we do with the money is that we try to scout for the best possible players. And how do we do that? The best possible players are not posh kids who pay for everything. So we have to incentivize everybody to be able to apply. Go ahead.
Your only claim to symmetric harms is that on our side, like individuals, still have an incentive to cheat, etc., etc. Note, only the top 1% of players on your side actually make meaningful income. That's why individuals have an incentive to climb that ladder.
I mean, you have an incentive. No, I think obviously if you get paid for it, you have some kind of you just don't have the incentive to ruin your reputation. I mean, we said that all over again. If you have no incentive to ruin your reputation, you have no incentive to ruin your income, And even like if you say that 99% of the people don't make a sustainable income on our side of the house, then I don't know where the debate is taking place, because we are symmetric, because you don't also make income, so I don't know why they cheat on our side of the house and not on your side of the house, because you still probably like, and I like seriously don't think that those people want to ruin their like lives and want to be banned from the sport on our side of the house to climb that 1%. What I think is much rather happening is that young kids see these people as a role model, and they much rather participate in the sport because they see that sport as something they want to be a part of, because it gives them sense of identity. So that's that response to that POI. But we say that the clubs have the best incentive to scout for the best players, even though they are not the richest. They have an incentive to pay for their surgeries, for their health, which is what they did to Messi, right? They have an incentive to make them really rich, and then those people come back to their own communities, to their roots, and empower millions out of poverty, which is literally what is happening. There are football players building schools in Argentina, building schools in Egypt. We say this empowers thousands of kids around the world. Why is that the case? Because there is a lot of money involved, right? Those are the top 1% that you're talking about. And at the end, we say we also build a better community for the fans, which is hundreds of millions of people, because they have stadiums, they have the community that is much larger, because the clubs are much richer. It is because they can pay for example, having gatherings, for having community projects, which is currently what they are doing in the status quo, which those people perceive as a part of their identity, which makes this impact great in quantity, but also in quality. For both those reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.
I thank the third opposition speaker. I now invite the opposition reply speaker to address the House.
We believe that money opens the gate for everyone to engage in sports. It gives us the unique opportunity to have the unition of people via the sports, the principal argument of the side of proposition. So let's look at the main clashes and how they look on both sides of the house. So first of all, when we talk about the cheating, which side of proposition brings there and pushes as their like strongest point with practical impacts, we tell you that like there are many structural reasons, such as the backlash, the checks and balances, the long term on the health of the individual, and the long term impact on the reputation of the team, which incentivizes you from cheating or doing anything which would harm you in that way. Even in their best case scenario, we don't see how this has enough of an impact to outweigh what we tell you on our side of the house. Because what we believe is the most important are two things. Those are the two arguments that we bring you uniquely on the side of opposition. First of them being the access to sport. Even if we accept their best case scenario that like the volunteer organizations get like some amount of money and you can participate for free, we tell you that if you have the business-driven incentives, you want to provide the best for these kids. We believe that a volunteer-based organizations can never get that amount of money as those big teams can, and they don't have their resources to then maintain it in the long run. We tell you what this uniquely means is that the teams can go into the villages and hunt there for the people. We tell you that when they try to claim like this is principally not correct, look at the two alternatives. On their side of the house, the kids can like play on their backyards, and they're just going to do the same. On our side of the house, we provide them the opportunity to get somewhere else, to have the opportunity to go to a college, to have an opportunity to make great money that they can send back to the community. We give them the opportunity to get access to best coaches. We give them the access to best doctors that can help them with their injuries. There are never funds for that on their side of the house because they don't have the profit-driven businesses on their side of the house. So what is the impact? What is the bottom line? On our side of the house, we are able to get the access to sport to most people possible. Even if not all of these children end up playing the top leagues. They first of all at least can get the experience of playing at that academy, and some of them can get then to the top levels, take it back to the community, and have a greater platform to talk about that. On their side of the house, there's no mechanism on how could like a poor child living in a village can get to a top league, because there's not such a selectionist process, no incentive to do so. Thus, less people on their side of the house engage in sports, and there's less appearance of role models, which we believe is the second important thing, because once again it has a great impact on like the community creation and on the fans base. We believe that because those teams are profit driven, they need to have a stable community, a stable fan base. What that means is that they need to have their athletes performing the best. Thus, they need to have best facilities, best coaches, best doctors, everything to provide for them, which means that athletes once again get only the best care on our side of the house, that they can perform the best, which once again has a huge impact on the ones who are watching them, because first of all, those are the communities, those are the fans that come, that unite together to watch those great matches of their role models, and second of all, it inspires them to also participate in the sports and to look up to them. On their side of the house, there's no such a thing. There's no such unison of the fans and of the communities as a whole. For all those reasons, because we have the greatest impact and we bring sports to all, we're so proud to oppose.
I find the op reply to close the debate, and I invite the proposition reply speaker to take the vote.
Right, confirming that you can hear me. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to talk about the nature of commercialization, and then I'm going to talk about the nature of sport. Firstly, on the nature of commercialization, or alternatively, is it good to make money, and is the pursuit of making money within any organization valuable? We think the answer from both teams in this round is yes. We think no organization can operate without funding. We think funding is instrumental to the support of players. Where teams disagree, though, is to the extent of the pursuit of this money, and we think it is there where the clash in this debate lies. Proposition tells you a couple of things. One, we tell you that within status quo, we don't think there's a harm in the generation of money, but rather there's a harm in the pursuit of generating money at all costs. We say that this generation of money at all costs is a characteristic feature of the professionalization and commercialization of sport. They don't contend this characterization. The second is we tell you that there is a culture of the pursuit of money that deprioritizes human welfare in the world of sport and sporting activities. The last is we tell you the alternative to this is volunteerism, and that on our side we think because of the fact of volunteerism, we take down barriers of access in which financial ability is no longer an impediment to your ability to access a sport, not only in terms of playing and academies, but even on a basic level in terms of literally going to the stadium to watch a sport. Opposition tells you firstly that on their side they have players who are able to access equipment. They tell you they are able to pay their players better, and they tell you thirdly that they can use money to buy to scout for more players, to build schools, and so on. They concede, however, in third speech that on our side we do make some money as volunteers, just that money is either a little or that money is symbolic. Those are the two possibilities in which we are able to make money on our side according to their third speech. There are two things to say about this contention. One, to the extent that they concede that we're able to make some money on our side of the debate, we can co-opt every single one of our benefits to our side of the debate, because we think that the amount of money that we're going to make is contingent on other factors external to commercialization. This is to say that we think in volunteerism, you can still make a lot of money if you use volunteerism to appeal to a large base of people. We think that because of that, there are many other factors that influence how much money you can get. So at best, we're equal, we're deadlocked on this contention. What shifts the balance then on this contention? What shifts the balance is the concession they make down the bench that's called out in my second speech, when they say that on their side, they have players who are able to return home, build academies, and so on. All of those things, as demonstrated by my second speech, are examples of volunteerism and demonstrate that we think volunteerism is a force for good in the world of sporting activities. On that basis alone, we think on the basis of that contention, we win on volunteerism. Second, then, on the nature of sport. We think that this, in normative terms, was what the debate should have been about, right? So an assessment on philosophical terms about what sport is and where the value of sport is best preserved. Proposition tells you two things here. We tell you, firstly, there's a universalistic appeal to sport that is lost when you create barriers of access that are financial in nature to sport, whether it is playing sport or watching sport, and so on. We tell you, secondly, that the fact on our side of the debate is you lead to things like a risk of cheating, like doping, but also that there is no opt-out mechanism for players because they recognize that they have to cheat and they have to dope to even make the bare minimum amount of money on our side of the debate. On opposition, they tell you two things. They tell you, one, that the likelihood of cheating is low because of the protection of public relations interests that they say characterizes businesses and sporting activities. They tell you, secondly, on their side, they're better able to create role models. We think it's important to note that even if on their side we assume both of these arguments are true, the possibility of doping and the idea of creating role models cannot coexist, because if a role model dopes, we think it defeats the whole point of generating role models in the first place. We think the fact that they're not able to entirely disprove the risk of doping on their side means they can't run role models and they can't run that the low risk of doping is insufficient. The analysis of this is on the historicity of sports and on sporting activities that tells you that sport is too universalistic to leave to the wills of the possibility of doping or the possibility of cheating. Panel, the value of sport is that it unites us in ways that nothing else succeeds at doing. We say that this is a unification that is only possible in a world of volunteerism. It is a unification that we are very, very proud to defend. Thank you.
All right, thank both teams for a very good debate. Please cross the floor, shake hands. We'll call you in when we've got the result. Thanks.
I would just want to say that I feel a bit sick, so probably I won't should go on the OA, but I will go to like my dog.
Thank you.
So I'm
Yeah,
sorry
sure.
for
Thank
that.
you. Yeah.
Also to listen to me.
Please take care.
I feel a bit sick, so probably I. So thank you for the.